Okay, so now I want to talk about basically the rest of the world in comparison to the United States in terms of gun control. I already covered the UK, and I spent a whole video on just them because they're the most common comparison that I see. And one of the things I pointed out there was that uh, it's a pretty small control sample, so small that I don't think you could really have any scientific conclusions. And so now I wanted to, with a broader brush, look at the rest of the world. And the thing is that um, a real common mistake is that for some reason people seem to think that the United States is the only country in the world that has liberal gun laws. And in some senses, it has very liberal gun laws, and perhaps the most liberal. Although I would argue that there are some countries where, in effect, even if they have technically a lot of gun laws, in effect they don't. Um, but there's quite the level of gun control varies a great deal, even in Europe. And so, for instance, people will say, "Well, Europe has strict gun control." Well, the UK does, Luxembourg does, Eastern Europe traditionally does. So Poland, Russia, if you count that as Europe, Slovenia, they have very strict gun laws. Germany and France, they have strict gun laws relative to the United States, but not relative to the UK. Switzerland has, in some senses, Switzerland is like the most comparable society to the United States. And in certain senses, the United States has less stringent gun laws than the Switzerland. In other areas, Switzerland is even more pro-gun. So Switzerland has a mandate on keeping guns at home for the militia or whatever, where the United States does not. Um, if you look Scandinavia, I don't know about Sweden, but in Norway and Finland, you have high rates of gun ownership rates, and in most guns that are available in the United States are also available there. You can own handguns, you can own rifles, you can own shotguns. Uh, I don't know about Sweden, but Finland and Norway, that's definitely the case. In a country like Iceland, they have a ban on handguns, but like shotguns and rifles, not semi-automatic, but bolt action, they're basically not that restricted. Um, and all this is to say that if you take these various countries, that's only looking at Europe. If we go outside of Europe, uh, there's not. I mean, you got a country like Israel. Israel has very low crime, but has extremely high gun ownership rates. Um, you look at Canada and New Zealand; they have very high gun ownership rates, and um, the only way that they're really more stringent than the United States is that they don't allow people to carry guns on their person, at least not without heavy restrictions. But in terms of just owning guns, most guns that you can get in the United States, you can also get in Canada and New Zealand. And just when you compare, the homicide rates in all these countries, you don't see a really high correlation. So the UK, it has much stricter gun control than France or Germany or Switzerland or Norway or Finland or Iceland, or even the Netherlands or Belgium, and yet it has the worst violent crime in Western Europe, and that doesn't speak very well to the idea that their gun control laws are a result in their low crime. And the other thing is a lot of countries um, around the world have gun bans, and they have extremely horrible levels of gun violence. So, so we have several countries that have liberal gun laws that don't have lots of violent crime. Like I said, that comes straight to mind: Norway, Finland, Switzerland, Canada, and Israel and New Zealand. On the other hand, we have quite a few countries that have gun bans, indeed total gun bans, even more stringent than anything in the UK, that have absolutely atrocious gun violence. If I just go to Wikipedia, you look up countries by homicide rate, you will notice that the United States is pretty high up for, you know, so-called first world countries, but it's like, I'm not going to count, it's not labeled, but it's like it got to be close to 100. And if you look right at the top, you've got El Salvador, Honduras, Jamaica, Guatemala, Venezuela, Trinidad, Burundi, Lesotho, Colombia, St. Kitts, South Africa. I mean, these countries, Brazil comes to mind. Um, these countries, most of them, if they don't have a total gun ban, have close to that. And like, I know here again, we need to use control variables, but like Jamaica, it's a dramatic example. Jamaica is an island. Jamaica is an island paradise, and they have the third worst homicide rate in the world. Like 7 or 8 times worse than the United States. And yet, people who always will say, well, let's cite international. For some reason, it never occurs to them to just look at every country that has a gun ban. When they only want to look at the UK and Australia, and that's it. They never want to look at every other country that has a gun ban. You know, it's an island. Jamaica should have no problem banning guns. But apparently, and just like a year or two ago, like the capital city was taken over by gangs. I mean, and you look here, even countries like North Korea is on here. North Korea, I mean, no gun rights at all. They have a high murder rate, 2 or 3 times that of the United States. We have Mexico. Mexico has extremely strict gun control and an absolutely atrocious amount of homicide. So does Russia. Russia does not completely ban guns, but nearly so. Uh, Same goes with several Eastern European countries, Georgia, Estonia. Um, so the thing is when people look at all these countries, they don't really find a correlation with strict gun control laws and lower crime rates. Um, and it's, I mean, it strikes me as obvious that you would want to come and, look at that. I mean, if you look, the UK has a higher violent crime rate than like the Netherlands or Germany, which they have strict gun laws compared to the United States, but not compared to the UK. And I mean, like I look at the countries with the absolute lowest on the list, um, would be like Iceland, and Iceland has they have a handgun ban, but that's pretty much it. Um, so the international comparisons are not anywhere near as convincing as people tend to think. And when there have been studies, I haven't seen many, when they try and figure out the correlation, it's like there's none or there's very little. I've heard that there's a better correlation with car ownership than there is with violent crime. So when you see a graph or that compares, the United States to maybe 4 or 5 or a dozen other countries, you got to wonder. I mean, that's very selective. It's not especially convincing. I mean, if the premise is that a gun control law, especially a ban, is going to reduce crime, then it stands to reason that you should look at every country that has such a ban. And I never hear gun control advocates do that. They always pick a country like the UK, which had lower crime before it had a ban, or low at the very least, its low crime rate precedes its ban. In which case, you can never prove that the low crime rate is because of the ban. You could argue that it had no effect or it had a negligible effect. So anyway, I think that'll cover it for comparison with other countries.